Dr. Mitzi Adams is here, one of our astronomers and scientists, and glad to have you here, Mitzi.
Let me first say I really appreciate the promotion, but I'm not a doctor.
Oh, I keep saying it?
I have a master's degree in physics.
That's right.
And I'm very proud of it.
That's right. You mentioned it as Master Mitzi.
Yes, that's me.
That.
Master Mitz.
I think I just typed it down as well. You're definitely smart enough. You got all that content, but like you, myself, I probably just don't want to spend the money to go get a doctorate degree. We got all the background knowledge, and so we're sitting here, we're taking questions live on Twitter. If you want to tweet your questions to @NASA_Marshall, use the hashtag Eclipse 2015, and we're trying to go through and answer as many questions as we can. Obviously, NASA has a lot of fans and friends across the globe, and so we're answering them as quick as possible. Our media specialists and public affairs officers are here in the studio, as well as myself. We're pulling a couple and having Mitzi answer them live, and then we're trying to backfill and answer the ones that are posting. If we don't get to your questions tonight, throughout the weekend we might catch us log on and answer some. I continually like to be on NASA's social media. Excuse me. And so I might be on there answering some more questions later, but we definitely appreciate everyone, not only your questions, but your content and your comments and your images. There's definitely a lot of people that are out there. Just every time I refresh my page on our NASA Marshall Twitter account, there's a lot of content, so we appreciate it. And thank everyone for joining us as we see this live video feed of the April 4th, 2015 lunar eclipse. This feed is coming from the Griffith Observatory that is in Los Angeles, California. Our friends and colleagues out there, they support us for all these eclipses. Sometimes we're fortunate enough, we have a television camera here in North Alabama that we will set up and we can bounce to that feed. Unfortunately, with this eclipse setting so low on the horizon close to morning, we weren't able to get that feed here, but you can see we are moving, inching nearer and nearer to our totality of the lunar eclipse.
And I'd just like to say that I dashed outside to see if I could see the eclipse, and unfortunately it's below there's a building across the street from us and a tree line, and I could not see it at all.
Yeah,
so thank you, Griffith Observatory.
Yeah, absolutely. We're east of the Mississippi River in the United States, and so those of us joining us live, you'll probably have the same, if not a worse view as it sets behind buildings and tree lines. And if you go in through the Appalachia parts of the country, it's already set behind the mountains. But if you're west of the Mississippi on the western United States, or if you're eastern Asia, you'll be able to see the eclipse a lot better than this feed, our view here. So we get this live feed, and that's really great. And so some questions as we go through social media to kind of keep moving along is why can't we see the other side of the moon? And we talked about that earlier, the near side versus the far side of the moon. The fact that the moon is in a geosynchronous orbit. The moon does rotate, so all sides of the moon get sunlight, but it rotates so slowly it's aligned with in its orbit it keeps the same face of the moon always facing us, which is why we always see the same side, the man on the moon. And so
it actually revolves once a month and it rotates once a month.
Yeah, it's a great way to put that. And I know, and Suzanne Foxworth, our guest who joined us earlier from the NASA Johnson Space Center, it's one thing they focus on a lot is the difference between revolution and rotation. They sound a lot easier. They sound kind of similar, and they start with the same letter, the end with the same kind of prefix and suffix kind of things, but they're definitely different. And if you're not quite certain the difference between revolution and rotation, take a few moments to go online and learn the difference. It'll really help you understand what goes on during these cosmological events. And so as we go through, one of the questions, I've seen this a couple times, and it could be from the same person, from Danny Malik 8 and several other people. How would climate change and pollution impact our view of future eclipses?
Climate change could impact our view of future eclipses simply by changing cloud cover. And pollution definitely could affect our view of eclipses because the color of the eclipse is determined by the particulates in the atmosphere. if we have a volcanic eruption, which can put dust and ash into the atmosphere, and it actually stays there for a long time, then the eclipses will be redder and darker, and so they could, from pollution, be much redder, much darker. Hopefully, though, pollution will decrease over time and not increase.
Yes, let's all keep our fingers crossed for that. But yeah, agree with you completely. It's so great to have you joining us. I know myself and our team here, we work a lot of these events, so some of these questions we can answer by practice because we've answered them so many times, but it's great to have you and your expertise joining us here. And so I want to thank everybody for sending in images and content. I've seen a lot of great stuff. A couple quick questions, and people asked if they could see the eclipse in Orlando. Obviously, if you're on that east side of the country, you're not going to be able to see it. One question we heard earlier, I've seen a couple times, is NASA still sending people to the moon? Missions to the moon. And so if you wanted to talk a little bit about what our future missions are, especially what we work on here at NASA Marshall Space Flight Center, which is the high priority of Space Launch System.
Yeah, we don't currently have any crewed missions scheduled for lunar exploration, but we do have ideas for exploration of the solar system, which will require the SLS, Space Launch System. During the days of the Apollo program, we had a rocket called the Saturn V, and that rocket stood 363 feet tall and had some incredibly large engines that got the command module and the lunar module out of the gravity well of Earth. And it requires a great deal of thrust, a really big rocket to do that. And that's why NASA has to have this Space Launch System in order to get any kind of crewed exploration of the solar system, either to the moon or to Mars or to large asteroids. All of those are within our plans, but nothing specific has been, no specific dates have been set yet, because the first thing we have to do is get out of the gravity well. And that's the biggest hurdle. So developing that large lift vehicle is a high priority.
Absolutely. You mentioned the gravity well, and so a lot of different content in that is sending crewed missions obviously requires more gear and equipment and supplies. All that is extra weight, all that means extra fuel, all that means larger rockets, and getting the hard part, as you mentioned, just really getting off of Earth's surface in that pull of gravity. Once we get above the higher parts of the atmosphere, it's a lot easier for us to manipulate and move around. And so as we develop the Space Launch System, NASA's next deep space exploration rocket, we've been to the moon, and as we heard from Jeremy Kent and Suzanne Foxworth, we actually have a little over 800 pounds of Apollo moon rocks that returned on those 6 Apollo missions. So a lot of that is at the Johnson Space Center, where we are able to conduct scientific research. And so we've been there 6 times. And so one great thing about the Space Launch System is that it's going to move us beyond crewed missions to the moon, to where we can go to Mars, destinations beyond asteroids. And one thing we mentioned we work here at NASA Marshall is the Space Launch System, but there's a lot of other really cool, exciting missions that are coming up. The Space Launch System will help put the Orion capsule, which is our crewed vehicle that would carry astronauts, which in fact here at NASA Marshall we have the heat shield from its recent December 2014 flight test, where we launched the Orion capsule up into Earth orbit on a Delta IV rocket, and we returned it, splashed it down in the Pacific, and we're able to bring it back here in the heat shield. We're doing testing and post-analysis on that now. But if we talk about crewed missions and uncrewed, there's another mission that's out there. It's called OSIRIS-REx, and it's a proposed mission that we're working on to send a robotic lander to an asteroid called Bennu, or Bennu, I think that's how you pronounce it, B-E-N-N-U. And so it would actually, it's the first U.S. mission that would return asteroid samples. And so not only are we working on crewed missions to go to other destinations in the solar system, we have uncrewed missions, spacecrafts and satellites that we launch on these expendable launch vehicles that will go out into different parts of the solar system and come back and return samples. And so definitely a lot of content that we're trying to get out there and just expand our knowledge. And so going back through as we are nearing our eclipse of the April 4th, 2015, some more questions and content. We keep talking about the eastern side of the United States may not be able to see this eclipse as well. It's definitely going to be low on the horizon, and so those folks joining us, as we mentioned, in the Smoky Mountains or the Appalachian Mountains may not see the eclipse, but I'm seeing some good photos. I've got at Vulcan MS Katie has sent 2 images where she can see the eclipse from South Florida. It's very flat in Florida, so she's got a great view, and it's right on the horizon, setting on some palm trees. The weather looks really great there, so we appreciate that. I appreciate you sharing us that photo.
When I went outside about 10 minutes ago, it was very, very bright outside here in Huntsville, and I could not see the western horizon, so I could not see the eclipse. But I believe the sun is up on the East Coast. So for those trying to view the eclipse in Florida, it may be a little difficult, and the moon, basically kind of the definition of full moon is that the moon will rise as the sun sets and vice versa. So as the sun rises, the moon is going to set. I'm afraid if you're on the East Coast, the eclipse is over for you. But if you are west of the Mississippi, if you're in California, as is our feed from Griffith Observatory in Los Angeles, you're getting a good view, and we are just about to enter totality. For those of you who'd like to do some timing, it'd be interesting to see how long this totality really lasts. To the north of the moon, we have a Plato crater, Mare Frigoris, Aristoteles, and Endymion, and they are disappearing from view now as the eclipse enters totality, or begins to enter totality. And I hope that you, wherever you are getting a good view of this eclipse.
I know, as you see a little bit of the northern part of the moon, you know, it's an egg-shaped moon. It's not round, very egg-shaped. And we talk about where the Apollo astronauts landed, and you can't see any of the landing sites now. All the landing sites from the Apollo missions, they were all on this near side, and they're all based around the equator. So right now, if you were trying to look at some of the landing sites from the 6 missions, they'd all be in the shadow of the moon. But some of our missions that NASA sent, if we talk about the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter and its smaller sub-satellite or sub-impactor, the L-Cross mission, one great thing about seeing the northern part of the moon and the southern part of the moon is the idea that deep in those craters, because the moon doesn't have an atmosphere and it's impacted all the time by meteoroids and meteorites, that deep inside those craters that there's actually parts of frozen ice that's left over, and that there's water on the moon. And so it's one kind of thing now you can see where we would want to have potential lunar bases in the future, whether they're NASA bases or whether they're private corporations, as we begin to see a lot more of privatized space exploration. That might be places, that's one place, northern and the southern hemisphere, we'd want to have lunar bases at. And so going through some of our questions, we know that the moon affects the tides here on Earth, the gravitational pull, and so does an eclipse affect the tides?
The eclipse itself does not affect the tides, but the fact that the moon is full for an eclipse to occur does.
It's good, I like that part. Let's see here, scrolling through and pull a few more pictures. Oh, you know, I'm gonna refresh. Yeah, and I liked your other suggestion. Please, we have told people that it's about a 5-minute of totality for the eclipse, and so yeah, if you're out and you're viewing the eclipse, feel free to time it and tweet us and let us know exactly kind of how long it lasted. That's a great way to be involved. NASA always likes interaction in our events and activities, whether it's in person and you're working and talking with us, or joining us today on social media. But yeah, this is a good way to kind of do peer-to-peer science, and NASA definitely employs some opportunities like that where we have the population, our fans and friends joining us for different kinds of scientific research, and so great opportunity if you could get out there and do that.
If you look at the feed there, you're we're beginning to see a little bit of coloration.
Absolutely. Often misnomered as the blood moon. You talked about that earlier, the fact that that's the rising sun and filtering light through the atmosphere. So it gives us that blood moon, which is, doesn't really have, it's kind of a nouveau word we mentioned earlier. It's just because it kind of turns red by filtering out that blue. And it's very exciting to see all this happening. Want to once again thank the Griffith Observatory. And so let's kind of go through here and pull a few more pictures as we see some of these great contents people are sharing. They're asking what time could they see from Louisiana and when would it be full. Louisiana is about the time frame right now where we're at, depending on east side or west side of Louisiana if you're in the Baton Rouge or the New Orleans area. So I would suggest you go outside right now. And if you're lucky, it's pretty flat in Louisiana, so you might be able to see it as well. And we've got people here in Montgomery, Alabama, who's asking where they can go to see the eclipse. And as Mitzi mentioned just a little bit ago, the eclipse is definitely setting on the horizon. The best place to go would be on top of one of the mountains, and then you might be able to get a good view if you're lucky. But for the most part, where we're at here in Alabama, it's going to set before we probably get a good chance to see the eclipse happening. And so
moonset here in Huntsville was 6:34 Central Daylight Time. Louisiana would be a little bit farther to the west, so you might still have a bit of moon visible above the horizon, but it's questionable.
See some people who are great retweets, and that's one thing about our fans is they definitely share our content. So I see lots of retweets as our fans inform their fans. It's a great way to get out there. I tell one person, that person tells 5 people, and that person tells 10 more people. And next thing you know, everybody knows that we're having a lunar eclipse. And so we want to thank all our people who are retweeting and sharing our content out here. A lot of the great content people are saying, hey, it's will it turn orange or will it turn to red tonight? And as we can see, we are getting a little bit of that red tint happening. That's very exciting to see that. I want to thank everybody for all the positive comments that we're getting on NASA social media. A lot of people are having fun times here. And so in terms of frequency, this is a question from @AstroFellow. That's a good Twitter handle. @AstroFellow, he or she is an aspiring astrophysicist, so they're probably enjoying listening to all your content. And in terms of frequency, how evenly do visible eclipses spread for particular places on Earth?
That's an interesting question. I'm not quite sure how to answer it, because if we're talking about lunar eclipses, if it's dark, you ought to be able to see a lunar eclipse. So that could be half the Earth, and that's my best. I think that's my best stab at that.
Well, that's a tough question. Obviously, we've got someone who's studying astrophysics, and so high-level questioning. And while you're joining us, one great thing we've heard from some of our guests and whatnot are some of the educational opportunities. We want to give a plug for, and we've been giving plugs all day, the Space Launch System and some of our upcoming missions. But we want to plug our internship program. It's a chance for students who are in the college and studying various degrees to go on to nasa.gov. You can Google this, actually. Just Google NASA internships. And we have internships at all the centers across the country, East Coast to West Coast. And so you can find these internships. And it's not just for people who are studying science and astronomy. It's great if you want to be a rocket scientist. We definitely are looking for more of those. But as you're joining us live here through the magic of television, we've got television producers and social media experts. We have lawyers and doctors and graphic artists. We have educators. There are just about almost every job you can think of in the real world. We have a place for you somewhere here in NASA Business Administration. The way I always explain this is that, I get paid every week like everybody else at a normal job, but it sure isn't an astronaut who brings my check to me. It's someone who works in the finance department who has an accounting degree. If we have issues here where the lights go out or the plumbing goes bad, we don't call the astronauts to come and work on this. It's electricians and computer technicians or welders, and so there's definitely a lot of different jobs. And so it was great to have that question from an aspiring astrophysicist. But please, anybody who's interested in working in NASA, just go and check on NASA internships. They have internships at all our different field centers, and you can join us right here. We've actually got a couple who are coming into the newsroom here at NASA Marshall Space Flight Center. They'll be coming and joining us this summer, and so it's exciting to have two young students who are interested in working for NASA. We're definitely this is a great eclipse and a great view from the Griffith Observatory. We want to thank them. Looks great color tonight.
Yeah. Yeah, we got the reddish color there of the moon to the south, and we are just about in totality. I would say maybe a minute away, perhaps. And this totality is right around 5 minutes for this eclipse. The shortest one in the last 500 years was 1 minute 41 seconds in 1529. So that you know.
Wow. That is pretty quick. That hustles through. Usually on a planetary cosmological scale, things don't happen that quickly. But wow, 2 minutes. I didn't know that.
Yeah, 1 minute 41 seconds.
Going through some of our questions and just kind of reiterate some of our answers. We mentioned this earlier. This one's at Chill Park. She was asking, when will a total lunar eclipse be impossible to see due to the moon moving away from us? And it might be a little hard to come up with a time frame, you know, calculating that math of the inches that moves away per year.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's obviously a long time.
It's going to be a very long time.
We won't be around.
I don't think we'll be around.
I hope we're around as a race. But yeah, absolutely, if the moon does move a little farther away. And so it's a great question. And another one that was shared is, I like this because we're trying to educate people while we share this content. At Miklos Lexo. And it's the idea, is rotation and revolution exactly the same, or will the far side eventually become the near side? So obviously, revolution and rotation aren't the same, but if we're talking about the moon moving further away, right now it's geosynchronously locked, so we always see that far side in that 27-day pattern around its orbit around the Earth. But if it's, and I was reading this at some point in time, that, you know, obviously 27 days now, but in 1,000 years it'll be 50-day. Basically a month would be 50 days if you think about it, orbiting around the Earth.
Yeah, I think it's probably a good idea too to back up and define what rotation and revolution are. Rotation basically is when a planet or a moon turns on its axis, rotates around its axis, and revolution is when a planet or a moon moves around its parent body. So our moon moves around the Earth, that in 1 month, that's a revolution. Earth moves around the sun in roughly 365 days. That's one revolution around the sun. But as the moon moves farther and farther away from Earth, I would expect that there'll be a lot of perturbations in its orbit, and it may begin to wobble a bit, but I'm not sure I can really exactly answer that question of whether the far side will become the near side.
I'm trying to answer one of our questions now.
Take a look at the feed, and the color is I don't know. I would call it kind of reddish.
I would
perhaps it's a blood moon.
God, that looks great, doesn't it?
And note how bright it is still on the north side, and that is the edge of the umbra and penumbra. So the edge of the umbral shadow of Earth and the penumbral shadow of Earth.
One thing we mentioned earlier, and it's great to highlight this for all our viewers who are joining us especially as you start to wake up. I want to thank you for joining us here on our live stream as we bring you this live coverage from the video is from the Griffith Observatory, and we are joining you at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama, North Alabama. And so one thing we talked about, now that we're starting to see a little bit of the colorization, we could also start to see the highlands and the lowlands that kind of disappeared for a little bit. And we mentioned how the temperature fluxes back and forth between sunlight and shadow, and so you can kind of see now where some of the Apollo lunar landing sites were. You can see those Maria.
Yeah, the Apollo lunar landing sites were all clustered around the equator of the moon, and initially they were chosen to be as free of rocks as possible. I know that Apollo 14 landed in the lunar highlands in the Fra Mauro region, and they, as all of them did, they made sure that as they landed, their landing site was as free from rocks as possible.
Some of our questions coming through in content, just to help some people. Some tweets from @jhosa2008 is letting us know that the moon has disappeared in Billings, Montana. So all our fans who are joining us in that section of the world, you've probably missed that eclipse, but fortunately you can join us right here and see it live. One of the questions, we were talking about internships earlier. This is another inspiring aerospace engineer at DEMX98. Is asking, are there programs for high school kids? And I was talking about internships for college students, and so are there programs for high school kids? That's a great opportunity, a great question. I want to continue to encourage everybody. Tweet your questions to us. At NASA_Marshall is our Twitter account. Use the hashtag Eclipse 2015, just like at DMX98 did. And his question about high school opportunities. And so, great question, and that segues right into something that we do here at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. We have a program next weekend and the weekend after that. We have a program that's called Student Launch. You can find it if you go online and just, or even on Twitter, just hashtag Student Launch. And that's an opportunity for high school and actually middle school, high school, and colleges and universities across the United States to come here and launch high-powered rockets. Very high-powered rockets. We're talking 6-7 foot tall rockets that will launch up to an altitude of 1 mile in the sky. So you want to learn a little bit about how your university or school can start a rocket team and come here. It's very technical. It's very high-quality content. It's not for the faint of heart. Another program we have here in 2 weeks is called Rover Challenge, and what that is, same thing, high schools and college and universities. This one is global participation. In fact, for this year we have, I want to call it about 90 teams from 18 states, but we also have teams from Puerto Rico, Mexico, Germany, India, and Russia who will be here. Very international collaboration teams who will come here for Rover Challenge. They design and build a human-powered 4-wheeled, 6-wheeled, 3-wheeled buggy or a rover, and they bring it here to the United States Space and Rocket Center, our official visitor center, and go through nearly a 3/4 mile long obstacle course. And you're going to see a lot of social media content being posted now as the event's near. Hashtag Rover Challenge, hashtag Student Launch. And the great thing about those events, we also stream those live right here on our Marshall Ustream page, as well as have them often picked up on NASA television. So next Friday and Saturday, and also the Friday and Saturday after that, log on here and join us live. It'll be myself and some of my other colleagues, the television crew who's joining us today. We'll be streaming literally all day coverage from almost sunrise to sunset as 100 teams or 50 teams come in different weeks. So that's a great question and an opportunity to plug all the hard work that we're going to be doing next week for both those events. And everybody will enjoy that, so a lot of fun and opportunity. We've been making some fun shareables and some memes that we'll be sending out so people can get an idea of what's happening. Going through, looking for some questions and some content we're getting. Obviously, the lunar eclipse is over for people on the East Coast. Glad you actually had a chance to see it. And in Toronto, the moon has set. So our fans and friends in Toronto, thanks for joining us on Twitter. And we're definitely seeing some colorization, Mitzi.
Yeah, and again, note towards the top of the image, the north part of the moon, it's very bright, which is the area which marks the boundary between the umbral shadow and the penumbral shadow, and the moon continues to move in its orbit around Earth, and it is beginning to move out of the shadow, actually. But we can see the color of the eclipse is a reddish, and these colorations vary from eclipse to eclipse depending on what's in the atmosphere. You can have even a grayish eclipse. This one obviously is reddish, which is very pretty and could be called the blood moon. I should note again, for those who weren't listening earlier, that this full moon, and you have to have a full moon in order to have a lunar eclipse, this full moon is called the pink moon, named after the plant, the pinks, that begin to bloom in the spring, especially here in the south. But that would be kind of opposite the harvest moon, which we would see in the fall.
And highlighting, going back to the idea of the blood moon and the pink moon, one of the questions that we received on NASA Twitter is, how long will the moon be fully blood red?
Not very long. As soon as a substantial portion of the moon moves out of the shadow, it will begin to, the bright part will overpower the shadow of the Earth, and so the color will change very rapidly.
Got some questions here and some content. Want to thank EWB4669 for joining us. They are in central Utah watching the moon. This is just about 15 minutes ago. It was 98% covered, and he's up with his kids, and so that's excellent. A wonderful opportunity. Sounds like a great family. I've got another in Meekum. They're in Boston, and they were curious if they'd be able to see the lunar eclipse because